Ruthless men rarely anticipate their own downfall, especially not at the hands of someone they deem invisible. Morgan Rossi was the untouchable, arrogant heir to Boston's most violent syndicate, worshipping only cold plastic perfection. He never expected his late uncle's twisted final decree to force a wedding ring onto a timid, plus-size archivist, the very woman destined to bring the mafia prince to his knees. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Casey Pendleton's high-rise law office, mirroring the storm brewing inside Morgan Rossi. At 28, Morgan was the crown prince of the Rossi family syndicate. He was ruthlessly handsome, dangerously spoiled, and accustomed to a life where his every whim was catered to by terrified underlings and eager supermodels. He sat slouched in a wing-back leather chair, tapping a gold lighter against his knee, waiting for the reading of his Uncle Jamie's will. Jamie Rossi, the formidable don of the Boston underworld, had dropped dead of a massive heart attack 3 days prior. With him went the iron grip he had maintained over the city's docks, casinos, and underground gambling rings. Morgan was ready to take the throne. He was already planning the restructuring, the house cleaning of Jamie's old loyalists, and the massive yacht party he would throw to celebrate his ascension. The heavy mahogany doors creaked open, pulling Morgan from his arrogant reverie. Casey Pendleton, a frail man with trembling hands, cleared his throat. "We can begin, Mr. Rossi. The final beneficiary has arrived." Morgan frowned, dragging his dark eyes toward the doorway. "Who the hell else is there?" "It's my empire." Stepping into the dimly lit room was a woman who looked like she belonged anywhere but in a mafia boardroom. Riley Jenkins was undeniably unapologetically fat. She carried her 250-pound frame with a crippling shyness, her shoulders hunched forward, as if trying to fold in on herself and disappear. She wore a shapeless, oversized beige cardigan that did nothing to hide the heavy curves of her stomach and wide hips paired with sensible scuffed black flats. Her mousy brown hair was pulled into a messy knot, and her round face was flushed scarlet with anxiety. Morgan's lip curled in immediate, unfiltered disgust. "Arthur, what is this? Did the catering staff get lost?" Riley flinched, her soft double chin quivering as she dropped her gaze to the Persian rug. She clutched a worn leather satchel to her heavy chest, her knuckles white. "Mr. Rossi, please," Casey stammered, gesturing for Riley to take the chair furthest from Morgan. "Miss Jenkins was your uncle's personal archivist, and, well, his ward for the past 5 years. She is central to the execution of this testament." Morgan scoffed, crossing his arms. He knew Jamie had kept some mousy girl on the payroll to digitize old family records and manage the legal front's paperwork, but he had never bothered to look at her. To Morgan, a woman was only worth acknowledging if she looked like she belonged on the cover of Vogue. Riley, with her thick thighs shifting awkwardly under a badly tailored skirt, was practically invisible to him. "Just read the damn paper, Arthur," Morgan snapped. Casey adjusted his spectacles, breaking the seal on the thick manila envelope. He read through the standard distributions properties in Miami, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, cars and minor businesses distributed to various cousins and loyal capos like Dante and Giovanni. Then he reached the core of the empire. "To my nephew Morganado Rossi." Casey read his voice, wavering. "I leave the entirety of the Rossi Syndicate, including the controlling shares of Rossi Enterprises, the Boston Port Authorities, and the family's primary wealth estate, valued at over $600 million. Morgan smirked, leaning back. "As it should be." However, Casey swallowed hard, looking up nervously. "This inheritance is bound by an ironclad stipulation. To claim leadership and the assets, Morganado must enter into a legal binding matrimony with Riley Jenkins. The marriage must last for a minimum of 1 calendar year, during which they must cohabitate. Should Morganado refuse, or should the marriage end before the year is out, the entirety of the Rossi empire will be liquidated and donated to the Boston Catholic Charities, leaving Morganado with nothing but his current trust fund. The silence in the room was deafening. A crack of thunder rattled the glass, but it was nothing compared to the violent explosion that followed. "You're out of your mind!" Morgan roared, surging to his feet. The heavy chair tipped backward, crashing to the floor. He stalked toward the lawyer, his fists clenched. "My uncle would never write this. It's a forgery. You're trying to steal my family's legacy and hand it over to this absolute pig." Riley gasped, a quiet, shattered sound. Tears welled in her wide, doe-like brown eyes, spilling over her plump cheeks. She pressed herself so deeply into her chair, she seemed to be trying to merge with the upholstery. She had known Jamie cared for her. He had protected her after her father, a low-level accountant for the family, was murdered by a rival crew, but she had no idea he would force her into the line of fire like this. "It is fully authenticated, Morgan," Casey said, shrinking back. "Jamie foresaw your reaction. He left a personal letter for you." Casey slid a handwritten note across the polished desk. Morgan snatched it up his chest, heaving under his tailored suit. "Morgan, you are a vicious, spoiled brat who knows how to spill blood but doesn't know a damn thing about loyalty or patience. You view women as disposable toys and family as stepping stones. Riley knows the true ledgers. Riley knows where the bodies are buried. More importantly, she possesses the one thing you lack, a soul. Marry her. Learn to tolerate someone who doesn't kiss your feet or lose the empire." Jamie. Morgan crushed the heavy paper in his fist, his jaw ticking furiously. He turned his lethal glare toward Riley. She was trembling visibly, her heavy breasts heaving with panicked breaths. She looked terrified, pathetic, and soft. Everything he despised. "Did you know about this?" Morgan hissed, closing the distance between them. He towered over her, radiating pure malice. No, Riley whispered, her voice a fragile, melodic squeak. "I swear to you, Mr. Rossi, I didn't know. I don't want this." "You don't want this?" Morgan mocked, letting out a dark, cruel laugh. "You're a penniless fat nobody. You just manipulated a dying old man into making you a billionaire mafia wife. You hit the jackpot, sweetheart." "I loved him like a father," Riley cried out, a sudden desperate spark of defiance cutting through her fear. "He was kind to me. I don't want your money, and I certainly don't want you." Morgan's eyes narrowed. He grabbed her jaw, his long, aristocratic fingers digging into the soft, fleshy cheeks. Riley froze, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. "Listen to me very carefully, Miss Jenkins," Morgan murmured, his voice a silken threat. "I will marry you because I will not let you or Catholic Charities take what is mine by blood. But don't mistake this for a fairy tale. You will be a ghost in my house. You will stay out of my way, and when this year is up, I will throw you back out onto the street where you belong." He released her abruptly, wiping his hand on his trousers as if she had dirtied him. "Set up a magistrate, Arthur. Tomorrow at noon. Let's get this joke of a wedding over with." The wedding was as cold and sterile as a morgue. They stood before a trembling city magistrate in a back office of City Hall. Riley wore a simple, unstructured navy dress that she had bought off the rack at a plus-size department store. It was the nicest thing she owned yet. Standing next to Morgan in his bespoke Tom Ford suit, she felt like a peasant who had wandered into a royal court. When it came time to exchange rings, Morgan jammed a massive, ostentatious diamond onto her chubby finger with enough force to make her wince. He didn't kiss her. He didn't even look her in the eye. Within hours, Riley's meager belongings were moved into Morgan's sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse overlooking the Boston skyline. The place was a monument to his ego: stark white walls, black marble floors and sharp, uncomfortable designer furniture. "The master suite is mine," Morgan informed her, pouring himself a generous glass of scotch at the wet bar. He didn't bother to turn around. "You can have the guest room down the east hall. Don't touch my things. Don't ask me where I'm going. And for God's sake, keep your stress eating confined to the kitchen. I don't want crumbs on the imported rugs." Riley swallowed the thick knot of humiliation in her throat. She gripped the handle of her suitcase, her knuckles aching. "Understood," she murmured before practically fleeing down the hallway to her assigned room. The first 3 weeks of their marriage were a waking nightmare of psychological torment. Morgan made it a point to parade his lavish, reckless lifestyle right in front of her. He threw wild, late-night parties filled with the kind of women Riley had always been intimidated by: impossibly thin, surgically enhanced models and socialites who draped themselves over Morgan's shoulders and laughed cruelly at the chubby maid scurrying down the hall. Riley retreated completely. She made herself invisible just as he had demanded. She spent her days locked in the penthouse's massive library, diligently managing the encrypted offshore ledgers Jamie had entrusted to her. She was a genius with numbers, a fact Morgan was entirely oblivious to. To cope with the overwhelming loneliness and the sharp sting of Morgan's constant verbal jabs about her weight, Riley turned to the one thing that had always brought her comfort: cooking. When Morgan was out at the clubs, or presumably at one of the family's illicit warehouses, Riley would take over the massive chef's kitchen. She baked rich aromatic focaccia, slow-simmered bolognese sauces, and delicate pastries, filling the cold, sterile penthouse with the warmth of a real home. One rainy Tuesday night, Morgan returned to the penthouse much earlier than usual. He was foul-tempered. His cousin Dante had been challenging his authority regarding the South Boston territory, and the stress was beginning to fracture Morgan's usually icy demeanor. He stepped off the private elevator and stopped dead. The penthouse didn't smell like bleach and expensive cologne. It smelled like garlic roasted tomatoes and fresh, warm bread. He found Riley in the kitchen. She was wearing a faded, oversized t-shirt that clung to her heavy curves, her hair messy, an apron tied loosely around her thick waist. She was humming softly, pulling a tray of roasted meats from the oven. For a fraction of a second, Morgan didn't feel disgust. He felt a strange, deeply buried pang of hunger that had nothing to do with food, but his ingrained cruelty quickly overrode it. "Is this what you do all day?" Morgan sneered, leaning against the marble island. "Gorge yourself on my dime." Riley jumped, nearly dropping the hot pan. Her cheeks flushed deeply. I was just making dinner. I made extra if you're hungry." "I don't eat heavy peasant garbage," Morgan snapped, though his stomach traitorously rumbled at the smell. "Look at you. It's no wonder you look the way you do. Have some self-control." The cruel words hit their mark, but before Riley could retreat in tears, a deafening shatter echoed through the penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the living room exploded inward. "Get down!" Morgan roared, his instincts taking over. He reached under his jacket, drawing his customized Glock, as masked men repelled from the roof onto the balcony, storming the apartment. Dante. It had to be Dante, making a play for the throne. Automatic gunfire chewed through the dry wall. Morgan fired back, dropping the first 2 intruders, but a third flanked him from the hallway. A bullet grazed Morgan's ribs, tearing through his flesh. He grunted, stumbling backward into the kitchen island, his blood smearing against the white marble. "Morgan!" Riley screamed. "Run, you idiot!" Morgan shouted, returning fire blindly as he slid down the cabinets, clutching his bleeding side. He was pinned out of ammo, and the heavy boots of the remaining assassin were crunching on the glass. Walking methodically toward the kitchen, Morgan gritted his teeth, preparing for the final shot. He had underestimated Dante. He was going to die here in his own kitchen, and this terrified fat girl was going to die with him. But Riley didn't run. Jamie's words echoed in Morgan's mind. Riley knows where the bodies are buried. To Morgan's absolute shock, Riley dropped to the floor, her heavy body moving with a surprising panicked agility. She scrambled to the hidden panel under the kitchen island, a panic cache Morgan hadn't even known existed in his own home. She didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a heavy, blinding tactical strobe light and a canister of military-grade tear gas. With shaking, pudgy hands, she pulled the pin on the gas, chucked it around the corner, and slammed the strobe button. The assassin shrieked as the blinding light and suffocating gas hit him simultaneously. He fired wildly blindly into the ceiling. Riley didn't hesitate. She grabbed Morgan by the collar of his ruined suit. Her sheer weight and mass, which Morgan had mocked so relentlessly, became his salvation. She planted her thick legs, utilizing her low center of gravity, and hauled his 200-pound bleeding frame across the slick floor, dragging him into the reinforced steel pantry and slamming the heavy door shut, locking it from the inside, just as the kitchen was engulfed in chaos. In the pitch black of the cramped pantry, the sound of the assassin hacking and stumbling outside was muffled. Morgan lay on the cold tile, gasping in agony, his hand pressed over his bleeding ribs. He felt soft, trembling hands, pressing a thick wad of cloth, her apron firmly against his wound. "Keep pressure on it," Riley whispered, her voice shaking violently in the dark, her heavy breaths fanning across his face. Morgan's vision was swimming, but as he lay there in the dark, pressed tightly against Riley's soft, plush body, a profound realization slammed into him. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't frozen. While his supermodel girlfriends would have left him to die to save their own skin, this girl, the one he had belittled, starved of affection, and treated like dirt, had just saved his life. He felt the heavy, frantic beat of her heart against his chest. For the first time in his life, Morgan Rossi didn't feel disgust when he touched her. He felt a terrifying, unyielding spark of obsession. He was starting to lose control. Blood loss and adrenaline dragged Morgan into unconsciousness shortly after Riley locked the pantry door. When he finally awoke, the sterile scent of a private medical suite at Mass General Hospital assaulted his senses. The harsh fluorescent lights burned his eyes, but as his vision cleared, he found he was not alone. Riley was slumped in an uncomfortable plastic chair beside his bed. She looked utterly exhausted. Her oversized t-shirt was stained with dried, rusted brown patches of his blood. Dark circles bruised the delicate skin under her eyes, and her usually flush cheeks were pale. She had stayed. Despite the mockery, the cruelty, and the psychological warfare he had waged against her for weeks, she had not abandoned him. A strange, suffocating tightness seized Morgan's chest, completely unrelated to the bullet wound in his ribs. He studied her. He looked at the soft curve of her jaw, the plushness of her lips slightly parted in sleep, and the thick, protective shell of her body that had literally shielded him from a hail of bullets. He had worshipped razor-sharp edges and hollow cheekbones his entire life, viewing softness as a fatal weakness. Yet it was her softness, her unyielding resilience that had just saved his empire and his life. "You should be at home," Morgan rasped, his voice raw and gravelly. Riley startled awake, her wide, dough-brown eyes snapping to his face. She immediately sat up, her plump hands fluttering nervously to smooth her wrinkled clothes. I needed to make sure you were stabilized. The doctors said the bullet missed your lung by a fraction of an inch." "Dante?" Morgan asked, pushing through the agonizing pain to sit up against the pillows. "Your capos secured the penthouse," Riley whispered, looking away, her shyness instantly returning now that the immediate danger had passed. "Lorenzo handled the police. He also swept the building. Dante fled, but Lorenzo intercepted his communication logs. I decrypted them while you were in surgery. Morgan stared at her, genuinely stunned. You decrypted Dante's burner logs. Riley shifted her weight, looking profoundly uncomfortable under his intense gaze. Jamie taught me. I handled all the encrypted offshore accounts for the Cayman Islands and the shell corporations in Delaware. It wasn't difficult to bypass a standard encryption protocol. Dante has a safe house in South Boston, near the old shipyard. She was brilliant. She was absolutely, undeniably brilliant. The realization struck Morgan with the force of a physical blow. He had treated her like a brainless, gluttonous maid, all while she quietly held the keys to the entire Rossi syndicate in her mind. A violent surge of possessiveness, dark and entirely unfamiliar, clawed its way up his throat. When Morgan was discharged 2 days later, the dynamic in the penthouse violently shifted. He fired the entire security detail and replaced them with men personally vetted by Lorenzo. But the biggest change was how he treated Riley. He no longer ignored her. He hunted her. If she retreated to the library, Morgan would follow, sitting silently in a leather armchair just to watch her read. When she cooked, he dismissed the private chef and sat at the kitchen island, demanding she serve him whatever she was making. He devoured her rich, heavy pasta dishes and warm bread with a ravenous hunger, his dark eyes tracking every movement of her thick hips and soft arms. Riley was terrified by this new attention. She assumed it was a new psychological game, a precursor to some terrible punishment for stepping out of line. She tried to make herself smaller, but Morgan refused to let her hide. The breaking point occurred during a clandestine meeting with his capos in the penthouse dining room. Lorenzo, a handsome, broad-shouldered enforcer who had always been quietly respectful to Riley, offered to pour her a glass of water when she started coughing. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Morgan lost his mind. "Touch my wife again, Lorenzo." Morgan snarled his voice, dropping to a lethal vibrating baritone that silenced the entire room. "And I will cut your hand off and feed it to the stray dogs in the alley." Lorenzo snatched his hand back, his face draining of color. Riley froze her heart, hammering against her ribs, completely bewildered by the sudden, terrifying display of jealousy. Morgan stood up, dismissing the room with a sharp jerk of his chin. Once they were alone, he cornered Riley against the mahogany table, his massive frame trapping her. "You are mine." Morgan breathed, his hands gripping her thick waist, his thumbs pressing into her soft stomach. It wasn't a threat. It was a desperate, unhinged confession. "No one looks at you. No one touches you. Do you understand me?" The uneasy tension in the penthouse finally shattered 2 weeks later. Morgan had initiated a massive coordinated strike against Dante's South Boston strongholds, systematically tearing his cousin's operations apart. Dante was backed into a corner, desperate and bleeding out territory. Morgan thought he had the upper hand, but he had miscalculated the depths of Dante's reach. The betrayal did not come from the streets. It came from inside the house. It was a rainy Thursday evening. Morgan was in his office finalizing a massive real estate laundering deal through Rossi Enterprises when a muffled crash echoed from the kitchen. His blood ran instantly cold. He didn't grab his phone. He grabbed his customized Glock from the desk drawer and moved silently down the hallway. In the kitchen, Riley was backed against the marble counters, a terrified sob trapped in her throat. Standing over her, holding a suppressed pistol to her temple, was Casey Pendleton. The frail, trembling lawyer was no longer trembling. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, resentful greed. "Don't move, Morgan." Casey barked as Morgan stepped into the doorway, his weapon raised. "Drop it or I paint the cabinets with her brains." "Arthur," Morgan said, his voice eerily calm, though an apocalyptic rage was boiling beneath his skin. "You've signed your own death warrant. Why?" Dante promised me 30% of the offshore accounts. Casey sneered, pressing the barrel harder against Riley's soft cheek. She whimpered, tears spilling down her face. Jamie paid me pennies to hide his billions. I'm taking what I deserve. And since Dante can't kill you directly, he instructed me to take the one thing keeping you in power. Without your wife, the marriage clause is void. The empire goes to charity, and Dante steps in to buy it all up for a fraction of the cost. Morgan's eyes locked onto Riley's. She was shaking her large body, vibrating with terror, but she looked at him with a profound, quiet trust that broke something deep inside his black soul. He didn't care about the money anymore. He didn't care about the empire, the yachts, or the tailored suits. If Casey pulled that trigger, Morgan knew his world would end instantly. "Let her go, Arthur," Morgan commanded, lowering his gun an inch to feign compliance. "Take the Cayman accounts. Take all of it. Just take the gun off her." Casey laughed a bitter, ugly sound. "You think I'm a fool, I know you, Morgan. You'd hunt me to the ends of the earth." "You have no idea," Morgan whispered. In a split second, Riley realized Morgan wasn't going to compromise. Drawing on the same desperate courage she had found during the first ambush, she threw her entire heavy frame backward, slamming her thick elbow directly into Arthur's sternum. The lawyer gasped, stumbling backward from the sheer unexpected force of her weight. The gun jerked away from her head. Morgan didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired twice. The suppressed shots were quiet, deadly thwips. Both bullets caught Casey squarely in the chest. He collapsed to the floor, dead, before his head struck the expensive tile. Riley fell to her knees, screaming as the adrenaline crashed, covering her ears as she sobbed hysterically. Morgan dropped his gun, rushing forward and sliding onto the blood-slicked floor. He dragged Riley into his lap, wrapping his large arms around her shaking, plush body. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the sweet, comforting scent of vanilla and baking bread that always clung to her skin. "I've got you," Morgan choked out his voice, cracking violently. The untouchable, ruthless mafia boss was openly weeping, clutching his plus-size shy wife as if she were oxygen. "I've got you. You're safe. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone hurt you again." Riley clung to his broad shoulders, burying her tear-stained face in his chest. "I thought he was going to kill you," she sobbed completely, ignoring her own near-death experience. Morgan pulled back, framing her soft, round face with his blood-stained hands. He looked at her, not with the disgust he had shown on their wedding day, but with utter, consuming reverence. "I was dead long before you saved me," Morgan whispered fiercely. "You are my entire world, Riley. Not the syndicate. Not the money. You. I have been a cruel, stupid monster, but I swear on my life I will spend every single day making it up to you. I love you." Riley stopped crying, staring at him in shock. The man who had mocked her weight, who had threatened to throw her out on the street, was kneeling in the blood of his enemies, begging for her heart. She looked into his dark, desperate eyes and saw nothing but absolute, terrifying truth. She gently rested her soft hand against his jaw. "Then you better start eating my cooking without complaining," she whispered, a watery, fragile smile breaking through her tears. Morgan let out a wet, breathless laugh and crushed his lips to hers. It was a kiss fueled by desperation, adrenaline, and a deep, unyielding obsession. He devoured her softness, claiming every inch of her, with a fiery, possessive hunger that finally brought his chaotic world to a complete, beautiful standstill. The year-long clause in Jamie's will no longer mattered. Morgan Rossi had officially lost control, and he had absolutely no intention of ever getting it back. He had found his queen, and he would rule the Boston underworld with her firmly by his side, protecting her with every breath he took. Did this intense, slow-burn mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching a ruthless boss fall hard for his unexpected queen, hit that like button. Right now, don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance drama addicts. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling, real-life stories and spicy audiobooks. Drop a comment below with your favorite plot twist. Today, thank you everyone.